Greetings designers! Today we are going to start working with line. As you all know, line is an edge or outline of a form. It is also, the element can be created by connecting 2 points. In three-dimensional design, line is an element that we work with on a regular basis. Sometimes it's the beginning of a sculpture, sometimes it's a finished work in itself. Everything from houses to figurative sculptures have a linear component that is built into them. So we're going to start working with that, and as a preliminary project, I'm going to start you out with these wire spheres. So I'm going to show you how to make one of these. Now this is in some ways a rather complex construction, but in other ways it's quite simple, and more importantly, it introduces you to a number of basic elements that you're going to need in order to successfully create your own wire sculptures. So with that, I'm just going to sort of jump right in and show you how to make this. Hopefully this should take me about an hour or so, and I think that if it's your first time, you should be able to complete it in about 2 hours. So, in order to do that, first I'm going to introduce you to the materials and tools that you're going to need. The tools first, you really only need one tool, and that's a pair of needle nose pliers, right, with a side cutter. If you don't have a pair of needle nose pliers that have a side cutter, such as these older ones, which just are flat in here, you could use any of these types of wire cutters. These are called dikes. This one is a side cutter, and this one is an end cutter. I'm going to use this one, and this will be the only tool I need. A couple things about the pair of pliers, though, that you get. The larger they are, the easier they're going to be to use. Sometimes people think that using a smaller plier is going to be a little bit easier, but in actuality, the farther back you are on the handle, the more leverage you have for cutting. So if you have a really tiny set of pliers that have a little cutter on them, a lot of times people struggle unnecessarily with those. And really the answer is to just have a slightly larger pair. A few different options there. In terms of the material you're going to be working with, we're going to work with 3 materials. Or I shouldn't say that, 3 materials. 3 types of wires. Right? Anybody who's familiar with piercing culture knows that wire comes in gauges. And those gauges, as the wire gets thicker, the number goes down. So this first one, which will be our main structural element, this is 16 gauge wire. And then for the skinning of our projects, we're going to use this 20 gauge wire, and you'll see these as we go through the process. And then for lashing together the smaller elements, you're going to use this much finer wire. And we'll show those all at once so you can see the different sizes. All right. So to get started first, we have to build our overall structure. All right. These spheres, right, are about 4 inches, so I can measure them here. They're about 4 inches. Right. So I'm going to say that I want to make about a 4-inch sphere. You could make something larger or smaller, but I find, having taught this project for many years now, that this is about the sweet spot. Right. Anything larger than this, and you're kind of just wasting a lot of wire and not getting getting all that much more. Sometimes people want to go smaller. Going smaller, you'll find that your fingers get larger. All right? So because you're working with little tinier things, it's a little bit more difficult. So I find this is about the sweet spot. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a few pieces of wire, 3 in particular. Now there are lots of different ways that you could make a wire sphere. There are other ways. The way that I'm showing you is really kind of designed in order to show you a bunch of principles that I think, or techniques I think that will aid you. All right, so you're going to want to start with 3 wires that are about 18 inches long. All right, a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, doesn't really matter. All right, we'll cut off some of the excess. I lost the end here. If you have wire and different size spools, you want to be really careful. You're going to want to be really careful not to let the spools unravel. All right, so I always make sure that I leave this wire. When I bought it, came with some tape. So I didn't say, I should have said earlier, if you are going to purchase this wire, you can purchase this wire at just about any hardware store. It's important though when you go into the hardware store and you ask for wire that you specify that you want picture framing wire. If you ask for regular wire, frequently people will send you to the electrical section, and those are all coded wires and we're not going to want to use those. These are usually found in the picture hanging section. So they're a little bit longer, but that's okay. In order to start my sphere, I'm going to want to use a form. So I'm going to use a form in order to get my initial shape. Now here I have a can of spray paint. You could use just about anything. Something like a beer bottle or a soda bottle, not a rigid, but a flat beer bottle or a wine bottle would make a good source. Starting point. So I'm going to start by putting a thumb on here. I'm leaving a little bit extra. Leaving a little bit extra, and then I'm going to wrap the wire around as tight as I can. You want your form to be a little bit smaller than the shape that you actually want. It is easier to make a smaller circle larger than it is to make a larger circle smaller. So see how nice, look how nice those are. These are maybe a little bit, maybe I have a little bit extra, but I'm kind of okay with that. That sort of sweet spot there. So now when I measure these, right, my paint can was about 2.5 inches, and the circles I made are now about 3, and as I said, I want about 4. So if I gradually kind of sort of stretch these out a little bit, I can make them a little bit larger. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the nice round curved sections, and I'm going to cut off the excess. So that's about good. Now I want my that's about 4 inches. And you'll see here that I have an overlap. This overlap will be really important. Let me trim that one a little bit more. Move those off. All right, so that's what I have there with that little bit of overlap, you can see. All right, I'm going to do this 3 times. In fact, actually, instead of using the ruler on this one, I'm going to go back. I'm going to use this first one as a template. And frequently when we're making things, we utilize a template so that we don't have to continue to redo something over and over again. You can see those 2 circles are just about the same size. One more. I'm gradually sort of pulling that out. So I was using this one. A little bit bigger. All right. Cut off the flat sections. Okay, all right, so I get 3 circles here. They're all about the same size. All right, now. So now that we have those 3 circles, as you can see, I'm going to try to find the halfway point of these. But I want the halfway to start at the beginning of this section here. So this is my overlap, and I'm going to allow that to just be an overlap. All right, so I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to find that spot right about there. come back up here, and I'm going to bend this one over like that. And what I've created here is a nice little orange slice. Nice little happy smile. See that smile? Happy. Not sad, happy. Actually, I want to go back a little bit and talk about bending wire. So when we bend wire, all right, I'm going to try to make this straight. And a couple of things about just sort of general things about working with wire. It's very hard if we bend the wire and then bend the wire and then bend the wire and then bend the wire to get the wire to go back to being straight. Right? It's going to end up looking like that. That's not a very good looking wire. So we always want to, if it's coming off the spool, it wants to stay straight. So we can then make a wire pretty straight by just kind of gradually sort of working these sort of bits out. Now, a couple of different bends that we can do. If you use the pliers, right, notice how I'm holding farther back, so I have lots of leverage. I'm going to hold it in here tight like this, right, and I bend. I'm bend a little bit over, and then a little bit back. Now look at how nice and tight that. Look at how nice and tight that bend is. Now at the same time, and this isn't a right or wrong, right? That's not a better bend, but if I have a wire and I bend it using my thumb, notice the different type of bend that I get. Right? Again, one is not correct and the other one incorrect. Right? They're just different. Right? So in certain things like this, I wanted a nice clean bend on that one. Right? So let's go back over here. I'm bringing this down to about halfway. Could probably be rather overbend it a little bit and bend it back. Again, so we're looking for that nice tight sort of corner there. Come over to this side. I'm going to grab that right about there. And I'm going to bend it down like that. Okay. And those look pretty even. Okay, so I got two and do one more of these. This one's and same thing. Find about the halfway there. Right about there, I think. Bend it over. Now remember, we're trying to learn how to make a form using line. Okay, so it's not. There are better ways. I say this in drawing all the time that if you just want a perfect rendering of the model, just take a photograph. That's what you do. Right? But we're trying to learn how to make a form using linear elements. So this is how we're sort of going about it. So you're doing it by eye, right? So we could use all kinds of. We could do a digital scan of this thing and then. Once we have a digital scan of it, just print, 3D print one. Oh, it'd be perfect. You don't ever have to do anything. But there's something about learning how to build things by hand. Right? So I'm going to take these three things. I'm going to trim these edges a little bit more because I don't want quite that much. So I have these three sort of guys right here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on to our next technique. Right? So we've got a little bit of wire bending, right, shaping that we have going on here. Our next technique is going to be lashing. So you can see we got this thing. It's all wobbly, right? It's all kind of coming apart. Right? So to do this, right, I am going to cut a very short little piece. So let's measure that. It's about 6 inches, right? Little tiny piece of the smallest 24 gauge wire, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lash this together. Gradually start wrapping the wire around. Right? I'm just wrapping it around, right? And I want to make sure that each one of my lashings sits next to the previous one. So look at how tight they are, right? See how nice and tight they are. Right? And if they start to get away from you, if it overlaps, pull it back. If it starts to overlap like that, pull it back, and then lay it down where it's supposed to be. And if they start to get to spread out a little bit, you can use your fingernail and kind of push them in here. It's still a little loose. I'm going to push the whole lashing up a little bit because it's sort of sliding down on me a little bit. All right, and then just kind of keep going around and around and around. It's a wonderfully meditative process. I'm just sitting here watching this sort of grow together. And get that little extra there. There's always a lot of complaints in the wire section about people hurting their fingers and poking themselves, and yes, it can happen. But for the most part, if you make sure that your wires are all bent down, you don't make anything that's going to make it so it hurts you. Right? So I'm going to come back up to the top now, and the little first part where I had some overlap, I'm going to go back and I'm going to put a couple more wraps. All right, and then a little extra there. It's a little too much, so I'm just going to cut that part off, and then again use the front of my needle nose pliers to kind of sort of squish it down. So like I could touch that, doesn't hurt me or anything like that. Oh yeah, nice and neat. Okay, so we're going to do that two more times, so we have a total of 3 of these. Okay, so I've made all 3 of my pieces. Right, you can see how they all look here. Right, and the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try to fit them together and make sure. Look at that, when I put the 2 things together, right, they make a circle, and I'm looking down at it, but it's not quite a circle. And so I'm going to pull that out a little bit. Right. And then what I want to do is I want to have this circle set up like this. I'm going to come down low here, and what I see is that this side is a little bit too high, so I'm going to compress that one down a little bit. And if I've done that right, try that with this one, make sure that these 2 are lined up correctly. And if I've done that correctly, when I take this other one here, this one should fit into that. Right? So that looks good to me. Now look down, still a circle. Now in these early stages of working on these spheres, they're going to get a little ornery. Right? When you haven't lashed anything together, it's kind of flopping around a little bit. Right? Any type of linear element that you're working with, when you're first setting them up, it's going to be like that. Right? So you say you're building a house. Right? One of the most sort of basic linear elements is the 2x4. Houses are all built out of 2x4s. Right? When they're putting up all together, everything's not super rigid until you put the planar forms on around them. So until you put a skin on the outside, which we're going to do, right, it's not yet quite rigid. Right? So don't be worried if it's flopping around a little bit and giving you a little bit of a hard time. Right? So here now I have my 3 pieces, and you can see when I put them together, they're already giving me the shape. Right? And these look really good to me. Okay. All right, so now that I have those 3 pieces, right, and I got my 2 pieces laid up here like this and this, right, I'm going to cut another piece of my lashing wire. Right, remember, this is my 24 gauge wire, right, and I'm going to lash these 2 pieces together. Now this is kind of important. I don't want to lash them together too tight, because if I lash them together too tight, they're going to stick together, and I need that little bit of space in them. And so I'm just going to put a few lashings on there first to kind of get it started, and then I'm going to pull that back down and get that to look more like what I want. Now at this point, I'm going to come over and I'm going to add my 3rd one. Remember, it's going to be a little ornery at this point in time. It kind of wants to give you a little bit of a hard time, wants to fight with you a little bit, but remember, it's your object. Right? You're the boss. You get to make it do what you want. Right? And then I'm going to pull that one back over. I'm still on that same wire. I'm going to come back and I'm going to bring it to the other side. And I'm going to go. I'm not using quite as many lashings as I did on the previous one, because then they would probably make them all sort of stick to one side. All right. And you can see, look at my thing's getting a little bit off, so now I'm going to reshape it. Right? At every stage in this, right, you got to go and you got to reshape it a little bit. Pull it back around. Okay, so I'm comfortable with that. Bend that around. Put an extra wrap on this one so it's even. I like to count the wraps and make sure that they're the same for each one. Cut that off there. And then look, we've made a beautiful lotus blossom. All right, so it should look something like that. See the three things? And it kind of closes all up. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to redo this on the top section. We've got a little atom here going on. Right? The thing that's a little different about the bottom section than the top is in the bottom, we don't have any of that extra sort of material. Right? So that's why I do the bottom, I do this side first. Right? So here we're going to do the same thing, right? But I do have to contend with these other pieces. But because they're kind of already in the right spot, it won't be much of a problem. Cut them along another piece, right? These ones I do a little bit longer, maybe about 8 inches. I'm going to start with this one right here. Oops. All right, so I'm going to do the exact same thing. Sometimes when people do this, they like to use the pliers to hold the pieces together. You could do that. You could try that if that works for you. And so you could do something like kind of holding the first wire with your plier. I don't know. I see people do that all the time. I like using my fingers. I'm going to use my fingers. You guys can experiment around and try doing it with your pliers. Okay. Same thing, I don't want too many wraps on there, and I don't want to get it so it's sort of pulling away. Right, I'm going to jump over to this side here. 2, 3, 4. Keep those kind of lined up, and I want them to kind of get away from me. And then this one, I'm going to come back this direction. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I got a little bit extra here on this previous one, so I'll just throw a couple of extra wraps on that one. Oops. Okay, so as I mentioned, see this one's not quite as neat as the one that's on the bottom, right? But we were sort of extra nice and neat on that one. Okay, so now, right, now I have a chance to look at my spherical form, right? And does it still look like a sphere? You can check that you want lines to kind of be matching up there, and so they kind of all sort of look like that. All right, on to the next part. So the next thing that we're going to do, this is the part where it really starts to get interesting, I think. First thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get some lashing wire. Just want to be careful pulling this stuff out. If you pull on it too tight, you can mess up your whole spool. Now I'm going to say that you're probably going to want about 18. Okay, so what I've done is I've cut a piece that's about 18 inches long times 2, so it's about 36, I guess, in total. All right, and I bent it in half there. I'm going to make 3 of these. This is going to be the lashing that's going to hold our skin on. So there's 1, 2. Don't worry if you cut the wrong size, we can always add more. One of the things about working with this wire is it's very, very flexible. Flexible in the sense that you can always add to or construct. Now remember that this project in general is designed to give you a starting place in order to design other things. So there are other ways to make a sphere. Right? And I think I mentioned in the beginning that this way might seem a little bit convoluted, but it is one of the better ways. And in addition to that, there are a number of key very important skills that are built into it that I think will open up possibilities for you in order to design other things using wire in the future. And it's really cool. So that's just sort of my take on it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my less busy end, right? So I have this one sort of more busy and then my less busy end. And I'm going to take one of these wires and I'm going to sort of put it through here like this, and I'm going to, let's try that again. I'm going to take one of these wires and I'm going to put it through, and I'm going to hang it off of one of these. Right, so if I call this one, I'm going to call this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So I'm going to hang it over number 1. So now I'm going to take my next wire, and I'm going to hang that one over number 3. Right, so 1, 2, 3. And then you can probably guess where this one is going, right? Over number 5. Oops. Gotta be careful with these. So now what I end up with is sort of this. And I'm not sure if this is some kind of jellyfish creature thing or something like that. I have a tendency to think that this looks like an Imperial probe droid. It's sort of my sort of favorite way of looking at it. So now that I have all of these little tendrily things hanging off the bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, so here was the one that was, let's pretend that this was number 1, right? I'm going to wrap it around once. I'm going to wrap this one around once, and that's going to get them to sort of stay in place. Right? That's what I want. I want them to kind of stay in place. I'm going to wrap this one around once. So then with the other one that I have, I'm going to wrap that over the one that was next to it. So this one that was on number 1, one of the sections I'm going to wrap around number 1, the other one I'm going to wrap around number 2. This one, which I was calling number 3, and I'm going to wrap that one around number 3, and then I'm going to wrap its fellow one around what I'm going to call number 4. Right? And then obviously the one that was on number 5, and I'm also going to wrap the other one around number 6. Now what this basically means is that each one of these ribs, right, each one of these ribs in my sphere, right, each one of these ribs in my sphere now has one of these little tendrils, these lashing pieces associated with it. Now I'm going to put that down. Now, onto our last size wire. So this is my 20 gauge wire. You know, the thing about these spheres is these wire choices, the 20 gauge, the 18 gauge, or the 16 gauge, the 20 gauge, and the 24 gauge wire, these are all appropriate for working on something that is about this size. And if I were to be working on something larger, I might choose something different. So if I was going to say, take this same idea, maybe I want to make a giant wire Death Star. Right? So I want to make a giant wire Death Star, but I'm going to make it this big. Well, I probably wouldn't use these same wires. I'd probably go out and, you know, maybe my original 16 gauge wire, maybe this is now my lashing wire for something that's that large. You know, that's, you know, maybe it's this large. I don't know. Kind of interested in that. Now I kind of want to go out and make myself a giant a giant wire Death Star. I think that the world needs that. Maybe one of you can make that. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to cut a length of this. I don't even know how long it is. There's about 18. It's a little bit more than 30. It's probably about 40 inches. It doesn't really matter because I will show you a technique at the end for joining wire together if the piece that you cut wasn't long enough. And I will show you that at the end. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one end of my wire here, right, and I'm going to put a little tiny bend in. All right, so you can see that nice little tiny bend I just put in there. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my piece here, I'm going to step back, and I'm going to take that little piece and I'm going to stick it on the side right there. And the wire that I have that is associated with that one, right, that particular one, right, I'm going to put a couple of lashes on that just to hold it in place. Right. Now, this is what I have here. Okay, hold it there. Right. So now, I'm going to start to bring this over, and I'm going to bring this one over to my next piece. Now I'm going to take the wire that's associated with this one. Now this is a little bit difficult when you're getting started, right? When you're first getting started, it's a little bit difficult because the wire's going to be a little bit ornery. Look at it, it's trying to stab me in the eye. I should probably be wearing some eye protection. Right. And I'm going to lash it, just one single wrap. Right, now I'm going to bring that one over to the next one. Right. I want to make sure that I keep this as a curve. Right, so I'm going to keep that as a curve. I don't want to start bending it. If I start bending it too sharp, right, I'm going to end up with squares. I'm designing, right, a nice smooth rounded surface. And so I don't want my surface texture to not correspond to my form. Now look, as I get down to this, so we'll call this one 1. I'm going to call this one 1, 2, and 3. Now as I get down to this one here, I want to make sure that that wire, that this rib is lining up with this one on this side. Right? Does that sort of make sense? Right? Because if it could start to pull up, right? And then I'd start to lose something. So I'm going to use the fact that there's one directly across from it in order to keep my form straight. Right? Oops. See, like I say, I got a little bit of a bend there, but right at this point, we're still very flexible, so I can kind of pull that back out. I'm going to keep coming around. Right, so I think these ones are getting a little twisted here. But yeah, that one wants to move around, right? It's getting ornery. But I'm going to pull him back into place. There's always one that wants to give you a hard time. All right, so now when I get to this one, I'm slowly, gradually starting to open up my spiral. And I'm slowly opening it up a little bit because when I get to this next space, I want to have an equal distance. All right, so that one, I want to move that one back a little bit. All right, and so look, now I'm back at number 1. Back at number 1, I'm going to wrap that. Now this is really important as we sort of start to move down our sphere here. And as we start to move down, right, I want to make sure that these spaces are equidistant, right, meaning that they have equal distances. Right, move that back into the camera. Right, meaning that they have equal distances between them. Right? So what I like to use is my own finger, because I don't need to go and get some kind of measuring stick or anything like that. And all it matters is that they're equidistant. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that how tight you lash this or how loose you lash it implies something. Right? So if you're working on another design, right, and you have a lot of wire laced really tightly, right, then what's going to end up happening is that material that's going to appear denser than something else. So if you want something to look light, right, we could lash it lighter. Maybe you could use 2 fingers, right? But that might not be enough. Right? If we wrapped it really tight, like a half a finger each time, Right? We'd use more material for one, but it would appear like a denser sphere. Now that could be a really important component in terms of being able to design something else, because you're going to be wanting to make other types of forms using these techniques, and the ability to render different densities will be important. All right, so I'm just going to keep going down this surface here. All right. All right, so every once in a while you got to kind of pull back a little bit and sort of check on what you're doing. And oh, I just bent that with my finger. Make sure that it looks good. Get back to putting these together. All right, so here we are about halfway. And this part is actually really, really important. You can see when you look down here, right, that some parts of my sphere have gotten a little off, right? So some of them, right, if I were to pull on any one of these too tight, what could ends up starting to happen is you start to get a flat going, so that it facets, so rather than feeling round. So we want it to continue to kind of feel round. So when we get to about halfway, we're still really sort of flexible in terms of the ability to kind of move it around. Once we get onto this second half, the sphere is really going to start to lock together, right? And once it starts to lock together, you're not going to be able to adjust it. So this is kind of the last sort of chance to kind of move the pieces a little bit, and you can kind of adjust around. You can pull your lashing a little bit more, or still kind of loosen it up a little bit in certain areas. Right, so I'm going to kind of just sort of pull these a little bit and kind of pull this guy over. Right, and sort of make it so I'm feeling kind of comfortable with where I'm at. Don't be overly harsh on yourself. These are handmade objects, right? There's a difference between a handmade object and a machine-made object. So we have expectations that certain machine-made objects look a particular way, and you could spend weeks with a series of different tools, making an absolute perfect sphere. And there's something about working on a sphere and making a perfect sphere. Whether you want to get into carving marble or something like that, carving a sphere is a true sphere is a challenge, right? And something that you might want to embark on. I like working with the concept of the sphere, right? Because it is such a beautiful and pure form. But these are handmade spheres that are meant to be done in about an hour. So if I were to want to make a perfect version of this, who knows? Maybe this is an armature for a clay sphere, right? And I'm going to coat all this with clay, or maybe I'm going to coat it with some type of fiberglass or paper mache or something, and make little spherical forms. Right? So how perfect you want to make it is up to you. But if it has a handmade look, meaning that there's a few bumps in it, I think that adds some character to it. Not too much. Right? We still want it to be a sphere, right? But we don't want to feel like we're necessarily competing with a machine's ability to do something. Right? Or if this were a course in sphere making, we'd probably be looking at different templates that we could cut out in order to make something. And we wouldn't be talking about a project that takes an hour or so to make. We'd instead be talking about a project that might take several hours or a day or something like this. All right, now, so this leads me into another sort of place here. You can see as I'm sort of coming around towards the end of my sphere, I have plenty of lashing wire up there, but I've run into a little bit of a pickle. All right, so here as I'm sort of coming around on my form, right, you can see that I've run out of material. All right, so not the end of the world, not even anything that you'll even notice in the long run. And so I'm going to say about maybe this much. All right. Now there's a couple of different ways I could do this. I could come back and lash this piece right to here, right? But I don't think that that's the right answer for this. Right? I think that what I'm going to do is let me show you two different ways that we can do this. Let's take a look. Right, one way, if the form wasn't right next to a rib right here, right, one thing I could do would be to take a piece like this, right, and bring it around, compress that, and then bring another piece. Hook that together. And we could simply just make something like this, right, which definitely sort of does that. Now you could lash that, this is a larger piece of wire, but you could lash that together, right, with the wire, and that would make that really sort of solid. What I'm going to do, because of where this is, right, is I'm going to put that right on my edge there, and I'm not going to attach it to the rib. I'm just going to do that same kind of thing. Wrap a little one here like this. Where'd my other piece go? Oops, don't want to lose that. Attach my other one just like that. But you'll notice that what I did is I put that joint right over where the rib will be. And I'll just lash that on. And I could have wrapped it entirely around, but I didn't think that I wanted to do that for this one. And allow the lashing to kind of hold that. And just, oops. And then I just keep going. Okay, so as I come to the end here, I'm just gonna, you might choose to end things in different ways. There's not, I'm gonna put a little bend there, just like I did on the start. Bring this up here. That guy around. Extra wrap or two on. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds here to kind of just wrap some of these extra bits around. Maybe use this little side cutter here. All right. And now, at the end, if I kind of spin it around, it looks spherical, pretty good. But then you spend a few minutes kind of going around and kind of just pushing things around, because while we're working on it, we have a tendency to, for our hands to kind of bend some of the other parts. But if you were careful while you were building them, you kind of squeeze them a little bit. Oops, maybe not that much. Kind of hold those around, you end up with a little sphere. All right. There we go. All right, so that ends the demonstration of how to make a wire sphere. Remember, this is not the only way to make a wire sphere, nor is it everything that you need to know about how to construct forms in wire. What it is one way of doing it that hopefully gets you excited about other things that may or may not be done. While you're working on other projects in the future or this project, be thinking about, how could I do this better? What would I change? What would I maybe do in some other type of situation? What if I needed to add multiple spheres? What if I was adding, a square or a more geometric form to that? All right, so hopefully there's enough information in here to get you started and begin your sort of journey on wire form making in line. All right, thank you.